3 chords, a pounding beat, a searing guitar solo. You know that sound within seconds, right? For 50 years, AC/DC has been this absolute fortress of rock and roll, never changing, never bending. So how did they build that sound? And maybe more importantly, how on earth did they defend it against time, trends, and just unbelievable tragedy? Let's dig into the architecture of a true rock and roll institution. See, this isn't a story about a band that evolved. It's actually the exact opposite. This is about a band that survived the times through just sheer, stubborn will. Their sound became this global language for pure, unfiltered energy. It was a brand built on never, ever compromising.
Now, if you want to understand that stubbornness, you can't start in sunny Australia. No, you got to go way back to the industrial grit of post-war Scotland. This is where the band's DNA was really forged.
Okay, so this timeline right here, it's basically the whole origin story. The Young family's move from the tough streets of Glasgow to a migrant hostel in Sydney. That hardwired this us versus them attitude into the brothers. But the key, the absolute crucial piece, was their older brother George. His band, the Easy Beats, had a huge hit. So he went through the music industry meat grinder and taught Malcolm and Angus the most vital lesson: stay true to your sound and control your own destiny. And in 1973, that's exactly what they set out to do.
All right, so they've got the attitude, they've got the grit, but they needed an identity, right? And this wasn't something that came from some high-priced marketing team. Nope, it was built piece by piece, through trial, a lot of error, and a little bit of family advice.
The name itself, turns out it was just sitting right there in the house. Their sister Margaret saw the AC/DC label on her sewing machine and just pointed it out. And it was perfect. Simple, electric, and it just captured that raw, high-voltage energy they were going for.
The look, on the other hand, well, that took a little more work. Before he landed on that iconic uniform, Angus tried, well, just about everything. Can you picture him on stage in a full gorilla suit? Or maybe as Zorro? Or how about a Superman parody called Super Ang? Yeah, none of it was working. So, once again, it was their sister Margaret who came up with the simple solution. Angus was always rushing home to practice in his school uniform anyway, so why not just wear that on stage?
But here's the thing. The real genius of the uniform wasn't that it was just a gimmick. The truth is, Angus Young was naturally pretty shy and had terrible stage fright. But by putting on that schoolboy persona, he could transform into the frantic, duck-walking livewire that became the band's visual trademark. It was his shield. Okay, name, check. Look, check. Riffs, double check. But they were still missing that one last, absolutely crucial piece, a voice that matched their gritty, blue-collar vision. So their first singer, this guy Dave Evans, he was all glam rock. The satin clothes, the pop star vibe. It just wasn't clicking. Then along comes Bon Scott. He'd actually been working as the band's driver. He had this raw, street poet charisma and a voice that was just pure blues and vinegar. He didn't just sing the songs, he was the songs. And with Bon in the picture, everything just clicked. The whole architecture of their sound finally locked into place. You had Malcolm's relentless rhythm guitar as the foundation, anchored by Phil Rudd's almost machine-like drumming and Mark Evans' solid bass lines. With their older brother George producing, they finally captured it all on albums like High Voltage and TNT. This was the sound that was ready to take on the world.
And man, did they start to conquer the world. But just when they were right at the top, the entire fortress they'd built, well, it was about to face its ultimate test. I mean, with the album Highway to Hell, they had finally cracked America. They were a stadium-ready act, selling millions of records. They were right on the very edge of becoming the biggest band on the entire planet.
And then, the absolute unthinkable happened. On February 19th, 1980, Bon Scott was gone. Just like that. The voice of the band was silenced. To anyone looking from the outside, it really seemed like this had to be the end of AC/DC. The band was completely ready to just call it quits. But then, in this just incredible moment of grace, it was Bon Scott's own parents who urged them to keep going. They insisted it's what their son would have wanted. So with that blessing, they decided to try. The story of how they found Brian Johnson is just, it's pure fate. It's wild. First off, Bon Scott himself had actually seen Brian perform years before and told the guys how great his singing was. Then, a fan all the way from Cleveland randomly recommended him, but the final push? Brian only went to the audition because he happened to be in London to record a jingle for a Hoover vacuum cleaner, and the ad money paid for his travel.
You can't make this stuff up. So with their new singer, they go into the studio, and the goal isn't to replace their friend, it's to honor him. The album they made, Back in Black, became more than just an album. It was a monument. And it sold, get this, over 50 million copies worldwide.
I mean, just take a second and let these numbers sink in. Back in Black wasn't a comeback. It was a cultural juggernaut. It became the second best-selling album of all time, period. It spent over 2.5 years, 131 weeks on the Billboard charts. This wasn't just survival, this was the single greatest triumph over tragedy in the entire history of rock and roll.
So you'd think after a resurrection like that, right, the greatest in rock history, you'd think they'd be invincible. But decades later, the band's famous resilience was going to get tested all over again, in a way that nobody saw coming.
The 2010s were just brutal for them. First, Malcolm, the founder and the rhythmic heart of the band, had to retire because of dementia. Then Brian Johnson was ordered by doctors to stop touring immediately or risk going completely deaf. Then bassist Cliff Williams announced his retirement. I mean, the band was, for all intents and purposes, gone. And yet somehow, in 2020, they come roaring back with the album Power Up, and it shoots to #1 in 21 countries.
So after all of that, just look at where they stand today. When you're talking about all-time US sales, they're in that absolute top tier, right up there with the Beatles and Led Zeppelin. They are not just a band, they're a permanent piece of the cultural landscape, built on a foundation that has just proven to be completely indestructible. So, in the end, the AC/DC story isn't really about a band that changed to fit the world. It's about a band with the sheer force of will to make the world come to them. And that leaves us with a really powerful question, doesn't it? In our culture of constant change and reinvention, what is the profound, undeniable power of building something simple, true, and just refusing to let it fall?